Hello again. Come read with me. I'm reading from Six of One, Half a Dozen the Other, which is my autobiography. And we're in the shirt and the shirts on our backs. Clothing so many children was a problem, unless you had unlimited resources. We didn't. Of course, there were always the proverbial hand-me-downs from the older kids to the younger, but we were a pretty rowdy bunch. Clothes didn't stand much of a chance around our house. Since the girls were not allowed to wear anything but dresses, our wardrobe was pretty basic. One church dress and one or two for play. I was forever tearing out the gathered waist in mine. Had we been wealthy or perhaps even lower middle class, we might have had to hire someone just to mend the damage we did to our clothes. As it was, we were on our own. We learned to sew at a very early age. How Mama found any time to sew, I'll never know. But so she did. Often she would sew late into the night. When she wasn't sewing, she shopped at thrift stores for more clothing and shoe bargains. Some were pretty worthwhile, but others caused us extreme embarrassment. Even poor kids desire to dress stylishly and want to fit in with their peers. Some of the things she brought home to us we would not have worn if we had been paid to. Looking back, I feel bad for her, knowing how hard she tried. But kids will be kids, and peer pressure can simply ruin your life. Mama had gone through the Great Depression and had experienced great want. So to her, anything that was in good condition was considered a good choice. Shopping for shoes was a problem because they did not last long, even at second-hand stores. The shoes were usually in bad shape. Mama was not too concerned about our finicky tastes. In fact, she used to tell us when we complained that we were just too persnickety. Her main concern was to keep shoes on her feet. To accomplish this and not have to take all the children with her, she devised a system that worked fairly well. Taking a piece of cardboard or heavy paper, she would place it on the floor and have one of us place our bare foot on the paper. Then she would trace around our foot with a pen, write our name on the footprint, and cut it out. Armed with this, she would usually find a shoe that was a relatively good fit. Sometimes, though, the shoe would be less than satisfactory to the new owner. We seldom wore shoes at home, and our feet were as tough as nails. However, we did need the shoes for school and church. Shoes rarely lasted long enough to pass down from one child to the next. I particularly had a problem with my little toe working its way through the shoe. I must have had a little bit wide feet. Some of the others had a problem wearing down the heels on one side, and some wore holes in the bottoms of their shoes. About the only time we could afford new shoes was at the beginning of the school year. Finding used shoes that fit the print of the child and that was in good enough condition to buy was a challenge, to say the least. This method of purchase often resulted in some unusual choices in footwear. Once, for instance, she bought me a pair of tennis shoes that would put one in mind of Joseph's coat of many colors. They were covered from heel to toe with thin, horizontal, multicolored stripes. Although those might be in style now, in 1963, they were way ahead of their time. She might have thought that since I had artistic giftings, I would find the shoes to be fun. If left to myself, I might have. Another time, she bought me a very expensive pair of black open-toed shoes with a very thick wedge sole. They had been very popular in the 1940s and perhaps may come into style again someday. Unfortunately, it happened to be my first year of high school, 1964, and flat-soled shoes with pointed toes were the rage. I'm sure that someone in the 1940s would have felt right at home in the wedge-soled shoes, but I did not. As unhappy as I was about Mama's choice for me, I had no desire to cause her grief. Knowing that she had more than she could handle already, I wore the shoes to school, hoping no one would notice. While riding on the bus, I tried to hide my feet under the seat. Immediately upon arriving at the high school, I rushed to the gym, put the shoes in my gym locker, and wore my gym shoes for the rest of the day. The fact that my name was written across the side of my gym shoes in permanent ink was far less embarrassing to me than wearing the other shoes. Then, before leaving school, I would stop at the gym and trade back for the wedges, returning to my gym shoes to the PE locker. It was less deception than it was self-preservation. When items of clothing she bought for us were too humiliating for us to wear, we had other ways of dealing with them. It was no use complaining to her. She had her own problems trying to keep us dressed. Fashion trends were not her concern. The only way to deal with the problem was to discreetly dispose of the offensive item in a harmless manner. We would hardly consider throwing them away because we recognized the scarcity of money in our household. However, we could hardly be chided for an item lost, stolen, left carelessly on the bus, or given to a child needier than ourselves. The latter being next to impossible, the item was usually conveniently lost. Another time, during 6th grade, shortly after moving to a new school, I had another fashion disaster. Until then, I hadn't been too concerned about clothing, and pride had not as yet become a problem for me. But by age 11, I had begun to be conscious of styles and less concerned about the functionality of the clothing. I have always had difficulty keeping warm, especially in winter when we were required to play outdoors at school. Often my bare legs and fingers would turn blue from the cold, but rules are rules and teachers had to enforce them. 2 years previous, Fonda and Joyce had gotten new car coats. These were very warm, soft vinyl, and thick fleeced lining. Joyce's was steel blue, and she was still wearing hers, but Fonda had outgrown hers. It was passed to me. It was cream color and not a bad-looking coat, but unfortunately, the coat was about 3 sizes too big for me. By this time, I had become more concerned about fashion than I had about keeping warm. One day, when the temperature was especially chilly, I was wearing a jumper dress with a thin white voile blouse underneath. Needless to say, it was not sufficient to keep me warm. The teacher noticed my inadequate dress and promptly called Mama to find out why I did not have a decent coat to wear. I'm sure Mama must have hated these types of phone calls, as she was always struggling to keep us properly clothed. She then made a trip to the thrift store and returned with a smart and what at one time must have been a very stylish kidskin jacket. It was waist-length, light brown, and very soft with a nylon lining. It probably looked very chic on me, but warm? It wasn't. After wearing it for a few days, I wished I hadn't been so hasty in leaving the other coat at school. At least it had been warm, like I had said. Peer pressure can ruin your life. Peer pressure in school are expected to go hand in hand, but peer pressure at home can be equally as bad. With so many children in one household, it's difficult to know where one's loyalties lie. Mine, for the most part, were with the sister just older than myself. Joyce and I were only 2 years apart, so she was not quite old enough to boss me. Since there were 3 boys following me, I had no other girls to relate to. Joyce and I were like 2 peas in a pod. We were probably closer than any of the other children in the family. The reason for this went beyond the closeness of our age. We had a lot in common. She and I were both redheads, both shy by nature, and both of us were bossed and teased by the 3 older children. We had a common bond that was hard to break. We spent many hours together finding things to do. Living in the country was seldom dull for us. We were easily entertained when we weren't working, and there was always something to do.